Hey everyone, in today's tutorial we will be creating a color contrast checker app. To create this app we will be using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. The purpose of this app is to create a checker that allows users to input two colors, that is a background color and a text color, and see the contrast ratio between them. We can also see a rating of contrast ratio based on the accessibility guidelines. This is important for ensuring that the text is readable and accessible to people with visual impairments. As you can see in the demo, there are two color inputs in this project. The first color input allows the user to change the text color, while the second input allows the user to change the background color. When the user inputs any of the color, the app calculates contrast ratio based on the color values. Also, the app rates the contrast ratio as very poor, poor, good, very good, or super. The user can preview how the text looks on the background by looking at the preview that we have displayed on the app. We start by doing a basic CSS reset wherein we set all the paddings and margins to 0. This removes the default paddings and margins that may be added by the browser. The HTML part defines the layout and elements of the page. It has a container with two color inputs for text color and background color. Next, we can see a result container that shows a preview of the text with the chosen colors, the contrast ratio, and the rating. The CSS part styles the HTML elements, including the font, the colors, the sizes, and the layout. Here, I'm using the EM unit throughout, which makes it easier to make the app responsive. Next, let's make the color inputs prettier by adding custom style to them. But before we do that, we have to hide the original inputs by setting appearance to none. Now all we have to do is set dimensions to the input and add border to the color swatches. We finally add alignments, margins and paddings to the rest of the elements. Lastly, we define some media queries to adapt the styles for smaller screens. Now coming to JavaScript, we first declare initial references. Next, we create a function called contrast checker. Within this function, we get values from the color input. These values are in hex format. We convert them to RGB by defining another function which converts hex to RGB and returns the RGB values as an array. We add an input event listener to both the color inputs, which call the contrast checker function. We do the same thing when the window loads. Now, to calculate the contrast, we call a function called calculate contrast ratio. The calculate contrast ratio function takes two RGB color arrays and calculates their contrast ratio based on their relative luminance values. Now, coming to the get relative luminance function. It calculates the relative luminance of each color, which is the measure of how much light the color emits. The contrast ratio is then calculated as the ratio of lighter colors relative luminance to the darker colors relative luminance with a minimum contrast ratio of 1. We display the contrast, and the output contrast number will be rounded to two decimal places and returned as a string by using toFixed method. Finally, the calculate rating function takes the contrast ratio and assigns a rating based on the WCAG standards. If the contrast ratio is greater than 12, the rating is super. If it's between 7 and 12, the rating is very good. If it's between 5 and 7, the rating is good. And if it's between 3 and 5, the rating is poor. Finally, if it's less than 3, the rating is very poor. The function also sets the background color of the rating element to a color corresponding to the rating. The contrast checker function updates the preview text with the chosen color.